Hello class, and welcome to Chapter 2 overview for Business 80 Medical Terminology. So the chapter that we're going to be talking about, Chapter 2, body structure, it's going to be a lot of terms pertaining to the body in general. So we're going to kind of start with, we're going to talk about cells, tissues, and organs. Remember in that order, okay? So cell creation leads to tissue formation, which leads to organ development, which then leads to systems, okay, or body systems, which we will get into as we continue to go down this path of medical terminology. We're going to be talking about body systems in terminology toward or referencing every body system, okay? So let's begin this one talking about cells. Okay, so cells are groups of or groups of specialized cells, cells being the smallest structures. Groups of those cells form tissues, okay, and then groups of tissues that combine together form organs, and then those organs make up body systems. Okay, so cell structure, organelles, structures inside the cell that have very specific functions. Cytoplasms are aqueous mass that suspends organelles, okay, or like a container that holds the organelles, all right? And then the cell membrane or the plasma membrane encloses the cells and forms its kind of outer boundaries, okay? So characteristics of cells: nucleus is the largest organelle and it controls the cell. Okay, and this is where your DNA is stored, is in the nucleus. Okay, the mitochondria is the cell's power plant. It's responsible for making adenosine triphosphate, and we'll talk about that, or ATP. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, or that's the energy that fuels all the cellular activities. So the way I kind of remember this is mito being like mighty, okay? So mitochondria being the cell's energy source or the power plant, okay? And then ribosomes and endoplasmic reticulum, those help to synthesize proteins and fat within the cells. The Golgi apparatus holds the enzyme that assists in the cell's metabolic functions, okay? And then lysosomes allow for cell digestion, okay? So good description or visual description of the average cell. You guys can take a look at that one, okay? So I like this one. All cells except for gametes. And gametes are going to be important to remember, okay? In particular, when we move on to our female and male reproduction chapters, gametes is going to come up again, okay? So all cells except for gametes reproduce through a process known as mitosis. And again, go back to what I said about mitochondria being mighty. Think of mitosis and reproduction of cells, okay? And then ova and spermatozoa, those are gametes. They reproduce through meiosis, okay? So all cells reproduce through mitosis except for ova and sperm, or eggs and sperm, okay? The 5 phases of cell division: interphase, prophase, metaphase. I want you to read these, understand them a little, okay? But know that there's 5 phases of cell division. Okay, and then anaphase and telophase. And telophase is kind of cool. It says a new membrane forms around each set of 46 chromosomes. I kind of like that. Okay, fluid development, different ways that fluids and solutes move through membranes at their cellular level. One form of fluid movement is diffusion. Okay, and it says solutes are dissolved substances. Try to keep those together. Solutes and dissolved substances. Okay, same thing. Move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration, and that's known as passive transport. Okay. Another fluid movement is osmosis, which is the movement of water from an area of high water concentration to low water concentration. And then active transport. So if you remember, diffusion is passive transport. Active transport requires energy, and that's where that ATP, okay, or adenosine triphosphate comes in, okay? So the ATP moves solutes across cell membranes. Tissues classification, the 4 classifications of tissue, epithelial, which is for the most part what we kind of call commonly as like skin cells, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Okay, so here's your epithelial tissue, continuous cellular sheet that covers body surfaces. So again, it's kind of like your cell or your skin tissue. Okay, epithelials lines body cavities, and it helps to form certain glands. Okay, its classification, epithelial tissue classification, simple or stratified. The shapes, the terminology surrounding the shapes, squamous. So if you've heard of things like squamous cell carcinoma, that's a flat cell type of cancer. Columnar, cuboidal, transitional, and pseudostratified. I don't necessarily require you to know those for purposes of taking an exam for Chapter 2. Okay. Connective tissue, that's classified according to its structure. So fibrous type connective tissue. I like the definition, the 3 types of fibrous tissues. Loose tissue, okay, contains large spaces, so it's very loose. Okay. Adipose tissue is fat tissue, and then dense provides structural support. So loose and dense are opposite of each other, and then adipose is fat tissue. Okay. Bone, the calcium matrix is what holds bone together as connective tissue. Cartilage is flexible. I oftentimes like to think of cartilage as kind of a shock absorber between things like bone. So if you look at something like the meniscus in the knee, it's kind of I call it a figure 8 shaped cartilage, which acts as a shock absorber between the tib fib and the patella and the femur. Okay, and then blood, which contains your red and white blood cells. Okay. Muscle tissue, 3 different types. Striated tissue found in the skeletal muscle, capable of voluntary contraction. Cardiac, which is your heart muscle. And then smooth, which is smooth muscle is long, controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Okay. Nervous tissue, primary function is communication. Okay. Properties, irritability, the capacity to react. And conductivity, the ability to transmit a reaction. Okay. Different types of nervous tissue, neurons, neuroglia, okay, or neuroglia. Let's see. Then we move on from tissues, the development of tissues from cells, we move into tissues becoming organs, okay, which is made up of a group of tissues, okay. And then it says tissues combine to handle a task that's more complicated than any one tissue could handle by itself. Okay? And then organs create body systems. So organs working in conjunction with each other can create those systems, okay, which perform very highly complex functions. Okay, so the body systems that we're going to get into as we continue down our chapters in medical terminology, we're going to discuss terms in the future about that revolve around the immune system, the nervous and sensory systems, cardiovascular system, the gastrointestinal system, muscular system, skeletal system, endocrine system, circulatory system. We're going to go through all of these. Okay. Now, when we talk about body structure, one of the things that I think is very important, especially for me being, originally when I got into this profession, I was an X-ray technician, is directional terms. Directional terms are very important and providers use directional terms often so that we know exactly where something is happening to a patient. Directional terms for an X-ray tech are very important because when we shoot certain films, we have to shoot them from certain angles where the X-ray tube has to be pointed in certain directions so that we can actually see things like bone or joint spaces, and there are certain views that we take that rely on these directional terms. Okay, so when we talk about directional terms, the kind of the simple ones are superior and inferior, right? Up, down. Anterior versus posterior, front and back. Okay, medial is referring to the midline, which we often use when providers are dictating notes about a patient visit. We will use that midline and then, describe where things are happening based off of where in relation to midline it's happening. Okay, central, peripheral means away from midline or away from the medial. Lateral is to the side. Okay, proximal versus distal. Proximal would mean closest to that midline area or nearest to. Distal means further away or further distance from midline. We use these terms in particular with things like the fingers when we're talking about a fracture in the metatarsals or the phalanges. Where is that fracture in comparison to being proximal to something or distal to something? Is it closer or is it further away? Okay, and then superficial and deep. Okay, the three body planes. I'm going to show you the picture on this one because I think it better demonstrates. I think it better demonstrates what these terms are. So if we look at these three body planes, sagittal, frontal, and transverse. Okay, the sagittal plane divides the body into its left and right halves. The sagittal plane. Okay, the frontal plane divides the body between its anterior or front and posterior. Okay, and that's oftentimes referred to as the coronal plane as well, frontal or coronal. And then the transverse plane divides the body into superior and inferior sections at the waist. Okay, so the transverse plane, transverse means across. Okay, so you have sagittal, frontal or coronal, and then that transverse plane. Okay. All right. Body cavities, the ventral cavity and the dorsal cavity. So the ventral cavity, okay, and ventral means to the front as well. So again, there can be different terms that are describing the same thing, and that's important to understand. Ventral being anterior with dorsal being posterior. Okay, and if you think of a dorsal fin on a dolphin being on their back, dorsal referring to back. Okay, so ventral contains the thoracic or the chest cavity and the abdominal pelvic cavities, and then the dorsal cavity contains the cranium and the vertebral spaces or the spine. So ventral to the front, dorsal to the back. The abdominal regions, again, I'm going to show you, these are terms, so let me show you the diagram for that. When we're talking about abdominal regions, again, for providers, oftentimes they're going to be describing where a patient's pain might be, or where they find a mass in a patient's abdominal cavity. It's very important to be as specific as possible as to where that is, okay, or where that pain might be. So these are the regions that the doctor would use or the provider would use to describe where that is. The umbilical region is kind of around the belly button, okay? And then we talk about epigastric, being above the stomach, hypogastric, being below the stomach. and then the right and left regions. So the right hypochondriac region. Chondro, Chondro. Chondro is referring to cartilage, which is kind of referring to the cartilage of the ribs. Okay? So the right hypochondriac region means the right below, just below the ribs. Left hypochondriac would be left side, just below the ribs. Okay? So that would be below the rib cage or further above the stomach region. Okay? And then the right and the left iliac regions are referring to that kind of low pelvis area. Okay? Body positions, we'll close it with this. Body positions, again, are very important if you are a direct patient care individual. If you're a nurse, CNA, medical assistant, then this becomes important because doctors or providers may want you to put the patient in one of these positions. Typically, these body positions are used for examinations of certain things, okay? So there are many different body positions. There's Fowler's, semi-Fowler's, the Sims position, lithotomy, knee chest, Trendelenburg. Let's take a look at those pictures, okay? So these are the body positions that are used to put patients into for certain examinations or procedures, okay? Supine and prone. Opposite of one another. Supine is laying flat on your back. Okay, so the way I always remember that is supine, laying on your spine. Okay? Prone is when you are laying on your stomach. Okay, so supine and prone. Sims is kind of like how some people might sleep at night, right? Is kind of laying on your side with a leg over the other leg. Fowler's, a couple of different Fowler's positions. There's full Fowler's, which could be sitting straight up at almost a 90-degree angle, and then a semi-Fowler's, which is more at a 45-degree angle. So there really is a couple of different Fowler's positions, a full and a semi-Fowler's. Knee chest, and then if you can kind of guess at what these might be used for, okay, obviously the supine position is used for examinations of the front of the body. Prone is for examinations of the back of the body. Sims could be used as a recovery position. Could be a recovery position for somebody who's maybe had a seizure and could potentially vomit. We don't want them to vomit and then choke on their own vomit. We would want them to expel that. So a Sims may be a good recovery position. Can also be a position used for rectal exams, just like knee chest. The knee chest position is often used for rectal exams. Okay. Lithotomy position is typically used for things like pelvic examinations, in particular for women who do a pap smear or a bimanual exam. Lithotomy is the position for that. And then Trendelenburg is, we oftentimes call that a tilt table position, and that's where we lower the head lower than the feet. This is often used for things like, getting blood back to the head, keeping somebody maybe from passing out potentially or having a syncopal episode. Syncope, syncope. Syncope means to faint or to lose consciousness. Near syncope or a near syncopal episode means that you almost fainted. Okay, and a Trendelenburg might be used for something like that. All right, so that is all for Chapter 2, and I look forward to seeing you guys for Chapter 3.